Pablo Escobar. On December 2, 1993, 44-year-old Pablo Escobar was shot to death on a rooftop in the Los Alimas neighborhood of Medellín, Colombia. Escobar had built the Medellín Cartel into the most profitable criminal organization in history, controlling an estimated 80% of the global cocaine trade at its peak and amassing a personal fortune once valued at $30 billion. By late 1993, Escobar had been on the run for over a year, hunted simultaneously by Colombian police, the American DEA, and Los Pepes, a vigilante group formed by his own former associates and rivals to hunt him down. He had lost his empire, his hideouts, and most of his allies. He was reduced to hiding in a modest middle-class house with only his bodyguard for protection. On December 2nd, Colombian intelligence intercepted a phone call Escobar made to his teenage son, tracing the signal to the rooftop house. A search block unit surrounded the property within minutes. Escobar and his bodyguard attempted to flee across the rooftops. Gunfire erupted, and Escobar was struck multiple times, including a fatal shot to the ear. Colombian authorities photographed his body on the roof tiles as a symbol of victory, ending a manhunt that had cost hundreds of lives and consumed the resources of an entire government. Escobar was killed one day after his 44th birthday in the same city where he'd once been elected to Congress. Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha. On December 15, 1989, 42-year-old Gonzalo Rodriguez Gacha, known as El Mexicano, was killed in a shootout with Colombian police and military forces on a farm near Tolu, on Colombia's Caribbean coast. Rodriguez Gacha had been Escobar's closest partner in the Medellín Cartel, responsible for much of its violent enforcement and its expansion into emerald mining and paramilitary operations. He was considered second in command of the entire organization. After the cartel assassinated a Colombian presidential candidate in August 1989, the government launched an all-out war against its leadership. Rodriguez Gacha fled with his son and a small group of bodyguards, moving constantly between hideouts along the northern coast. Colombian security forces, aided by American intelligence tracking his radio communications, located his convoy on a rural road. A helicopter gunship opened fire and ground troops moved in. Rodriguez Gacha and his 19-year-old son were both killed in the exchange, alongside several bodyguards, in one of the first major victories of the government's war on the cartel. Griselda Blanco. On September 3, 2012, 69-year-old Griselda Blanco, known as La Madrina, the Godmother, was shot to death outside a butcher shop in Medellín, Colombia. Blanco had built one of the earliest major cocaine trafficking networks between Colombia and the United States in the 1970s and 1980s, pioneering the use of motorcycle hitmen for assassinations, a method that would later be copied by cartels across Latin America. She was believed to have ordered or personally carried out over 200 murders. After serving nearly 2 decades in American prisons on drug and murder charges, Blanco was deported back to Colombia in 2004. She lived quietly for years, largely out of the public eye, believing she had outlasted her enemies. On the evening of September 3rd, Blanco left the butcher shop and climbed into a car. A motorcycle pulled alongside and a gunman pulled open fire twice, killing her instantly. The method matched almost exactly the assassination technique she herself had pioneered decades earlier. No suspect was ever formally charged. Ignacio Carrillo Eguerrio. On July 4, 1997, 41-year-old Ignacio Carrillo Eguerrio, known as the Lord of the Skies, died on an operating table in a private hospital in Mexico City during an extensive plastic surgery procedure. Carrillo Fuentes had built the Juarez Cartel into Mexico's most powerful trafficking organization by pioneering the use of Boeing 727 aircraft to fly cocaine directly from Colombia into Mexico, a method that earned him his nickname and moved staggering volumes of product past law enforcement. By 1997, Carrillo Fuentes was one of the most wanted men in Mexico, and he had grown obsessed with evading capture by permanently altering his appearance. He arranged an elaborate, secretive facial reconstruction and liposuction surgery under a false identity, using a small team of surgeons sworn to silence. The surgery went catastrophically wrong. Carrillo Fuentes suffered respiratory failure and cardiac arrest on the table, likely from a combination of excessive sedation and the extreme physical strain of undergoing multiple procedures at once. He died before the anesthesia even fully wore off. Days later, the bodies of two of the surgeons were found stuffed in cement drums, believed to be retaliation from Carrillo Fuentes' own associates who suspected they had deliberately botched the operation. Ignacio Coronel Vigario. On July 29, 2010, 51-year-old Ignacio Coronel Vigario, known as Nacho Coronel, was killed during a Mexican army raid on a residential compound in Zapopan, Guadalajara, near Mexico City. Coronel Vigario had served as one of the top lieutenants of the Sinaloa Cartel, overseeing much of its methamphetamine production and earning a reputation as one of the wealthiest and most elusive Mexican traffickers, having evaded capture for years despite a substantial bounty on his head. Mexican military intelligence tracked him to a walled property using a combination of informants and communications intercepts. Soldiers stormed the compound in the early evening. Coronel Vigario opened fire on the approaching troops from inside the house rather than surrender. He was killed in the resulting gun battle, becoming the first major Sinaloa cartel boss to be taken down since the organization's rise to dominance. Mexican authorities described the raid as one of the most significant blows dealt to the cartel in years, though the organization itself continued operating largely uninterrupted under new leadership within days. Arturo Beltran Leyva. On December 16, 2009, 47-year-old Arturo Beltran Leyva, known as El Barbas, was killed during a Mexican Navy raid on a luxury apartment complex in Cuernavaca, south of Mexico City. Arturo Beltran Leyva had once been a top Sinaloa cartel commander before splitting from the organization in a bloody rupture, forming his own cartel and igniting one of the deadliest internal wars in Mexican cartel history, blamed for thousands of deaths. Mexican Marines surrounded the apartment complex after receiving a tip, reportedly from a party being held inside the building. What followed was a nearly 2-hour firefight, with grenades and heavy gunfire exchanged between Marines and Beltran Leyva's security detail. Beltran Leyva was killed in the assault, reportedly while reloading a weapon. In an unusual and controversial move, Mexican Navy personnel photographed his body draped in cash and jewelry taken from the scene, images that were later leaked to the press and widely criticized as a form of triumphant humiliation typically reserved for the cartels themselves. Nazario Moreno Gonzalez. On March 9, 2014, approximately 44-year-old Nazario Moreno Gonzalez, known as El Chayo and El Mas Loco, was killed in a shootout with Mexican federal forces in Michoacán state. Moreno Gonzalez had co-founded La Familia Michoacana and later its splinter organization, the Knights Templar Cartel, blending brutal violence with an invented religious ideology, distributing his own self-written pseudo-biblical pamphlets to followers and presenting himself as a spiritual guide to his cartel soldiers. The strangest part of his death is that Mexican authorities had already declared him dead once before, in December 2010, following an earlier gun battle in the same region. His death was celebrated at the time, only for evidence to emerge years later suggesting he had survived and continued running operations from hiding. In 2014, Mexican Marines finally caught up with him for real, killing him in a raid and confirming his identity through DNA testing this time, ending the confusion once and for all. Moreno Gonzalez remains the only cartel boss on this list who was declared dead twice, 4 years apart, before authorities could prove it a second time. Heriberto Lazcano. On October 7, 2012, 37-year-old Heriberto Lazcano, known as El Lazca, was killed in a shootout with Mexican Marines following a baseball game in Progreso, Coahuila. Lazcano was a former Mexican Special Forces soldier who deserted to become the founder and leader of Los Zetas, transforming the organization from a cartel enforcement squad into one of the most feared paramilitary drug trafficking organizations in the Western Hemisphere. Marines received a tip that Lizcano was attending the game and moved in as he attempted to flee. He was shot and killed at the scene, and his body was transported to a local funeral home for processing, while authorities worked to confirm his identity through fingerprint records, since the body itself was never recovered. To this day, no one has ever found out what happened to it. Every man on this list built an empire on the same promise, that money and violence could buy permanent control. Not one of them got to keep it.